The Whitmore estate loomed at the edge of town, a grand relic from another era. Once its halls had echoed with music, the rich timbre of Henry Whitmore's piano drifting through the open windows on warm summer nights. The town had adored him, the charming young musician with a beautiful wife and a home filled with light and laughter. But that was before Eleanor's sudden death, before the curtains were drawn, the front gate locked, and the world outside was shut away. The people of Maplewood whispered about Henry in the years that followed. The butcher swore he saw him pacing the upstairs hallway late at night, a flickering candle in hand. The grocer's wife claimed that when she delivered his food, the house smelled oddly of perfume, sweet, cloying, and thick enough to make her head swim. And the children, daring each other on Halloween, would creep up to the iron gate and swear they heard piano music drifting from within. Henry himself was rarely seen. On the rare occasion he ventured into town, he was polite but distant, his clothes meticulously pressed, his hair combed back with a precision that seemed almost unnatural. But it was his eyes that unsettled people most, hollow, lost in some unseen world, as though he were merely a spectator moving among the living. As the years passed, the town grew, new families moved in, and the legend of Henry Whitmore became little more than a bedtime story. The old manor, hidden behind ivory-covered walls, faded from memory, until the day the silence was broken. When Henry did not come to collect his groceries, the town grew concerned. Days passed, then a week. Finally, a group of townspeople gathered at his gate, hesitant but unable to ignore the gnawing sense of unease. The house loomed over them, its windows dark, its air heavy with something unspoken. They forced the door open. Inside, the house was still, too still. Dust hung in the air, thick as mist. The furniture remained untouched, as if waiting for someone to return. But there was no sound, no movement, only the faintest scent of roses, decayed and cloying. They found Henry in his armchair, his body slumped, hands resting in his lap, as though he had merely dozed off. His skin was pale, his lips slightly parted, his body long cold. But it was not Henry that made them gasp. It was Eleanor. She lay in their bed, perfectly still, dressed in ivory lace. Her face was smooth, untouched by time, her dark hair arranged in soft waves against the pillow. For a moment the townspeople hesitated, their hearts stuttering in their chests. Had the rumors been wrong? Had Eleanor never died at all? But then they stepped closer. The candlelight flickered across her face, revealing something unnatural in the curve of her cheek, the stiffness of her hands. A tremor passed through the group as one man reached forward, hesitating before pressing his fingers lightly to her wrist. There was no warmth, there was no softness, only something cold, unyielding, and wrong. The truth unraveled like a nightmare. Piano wire bound her bones together, holding her fragile frame in place. Glass eyes, too bright and too perfect, stared blankly at the ceiling. Her skin, smooth yet strangely waxen, had been carefully wrapped in silk, soaked in plaster and wax to preserve its form. And beneath her gown, her hollowed body was stuffed with rags, the stuffing shifting with the slightest movement. The scent of perfume, once a mere curiosity, now reeked of desperation, a futile attempt to mask what time could not erase. The silence was deafening. No one spoke, no one dared to. Henry had not buried his wife. He had not let her go. For decades he had lived with her, slept beside her, whispered his love into the hollow of her ear. He had held on to her so tightly that even death had not been allowed to take her. As the house settled around them, an eerie sound broke the silence. A dry, papery rustling as the weight of discovery shifted the rags within her fragile form. And somewhere in the town that night, a piano played its final note. Thank you for joining me on my latest short story. You can find out more about my art and my stories at my website, tfhcalifornia.com.